Hello, everyone. Today, I'll be speaking on the topic non-conventional methods of improving contributor experience in open source. 3 years ago, when I started my contribution within the open source space, I made attempts to 2 different communities to try and get involved or contribute in one way or the other, but to no avail. And it was quite a struggle for me because every time I tried, I encountered one blocker or the other. Either the documentation was not understandable or simplified enough for me to understand, because at the time I had very little skills to get involved. Or I got into the Slack communities and I didn't feel welcomed enough to participate or even stay long enough to, find my foot. Now, this is the story for most contributors who wish to get into the open source space. And I am not saying that the communities are at fault, but then there's something that could actually be done to help improve this experience for individual contributors. And that is why today I'll use this session to share some of the non-conventional methods we can use in addressing these challenges contributors experience. My name is Anita Ihuman, and I am a developer advocate and technical writer. And I'm also a fan of open source. I've been contributing for over 3 years. I'm currently a member of the Chaos community and the Layer 5 community, Open Collective, as well as the Good Docs project. And I am also a technical writer at AutoCloud. So during this section, we are going to be looking a bit on how we can understand the contributor journey. Then we'll dive down to checklists for contributors and project lists to look at when contributing and also when reviewing contributor experience. We'll definitely talk about where to track contributions and what to actually track. We're further going to look at the key requirements for contributor experience and then non-conventional methods we can use to recruit and retain contributors, and then best practices to keep in mind. So let's get into it. Now, there's this quote from the Django Software Foundation that says, improving contributor experience is not just a one-time effort, but a continuous process of learning, iterating, and also improving. Because it doesn't stop at making the efforts for the first month and then letting the contributors do what they will. Because from the moment the contributor comes into the community down to the stage where they're able to do things on their own and even assume leadership roles, all that can be classified as a contributor experience. And so when you're trying to improve on the experience, you're not only looking at the first day or the first moment they get into your community, but you're also looking at the contributors' journey on the long run to where they start to assume management roles and even leadership roles within your respective open source communities. And that is why this picture I have here gives us a broad explanation of how the contributor journey goes within the open source space. Now, most times when we carry out outreach programs in our communities, just to spread the word about our communities to get more contributors or more interested participants, the high chances at that point you're going to get over 10 to 20, 30, even 100 contributors rush into your community. Now, it is awesome experience to have all these amazing persons jump in at that time. However, what happens after the first 2 months that you did these outreach programs or even gave out these tweets to call for participation within your community? Now, we see that sometimes people, after these programs are led and the users or the contributors come in, you're definitely going to have a lot of persons coming in to ask questions at the time, trying to participate in the best ways. Now, most of these persons are coming in because they see the project is an exciting one and has offers specific features that they think aligns with their interests. Some of them think that your community might be the right opportunity for them to contribute or even break into the open source space. Others want to use your community as a learning platform to scale their career, and people come in for several reasons. However, this level of contributors are often qualified as users. Now, after about a month or two, very few of these individuals are left behind or even remain behind try and make efforts. Now, at this stage, you have the irregular contributors who come in every once in a while, make a pull request once in a month or two. Some of them are active every once within the meetups, and these are called the helpers because every once in a while they try to make one change about on something they've noticed or something they've recognized and they feel is worth implementing. Then after 3 to 4, 5, 6 months, there are the very few that are less, which oftentimes is not a handful of contributors. These are qualified as the active contributors, which have been within the community for a longer duration. They go on to lead themselves, they're active, and they can actually do things on their own. They understand by this time how the community works, and they are even capable of helping themselves discover new ways to contribute within your community. And they're definitely just, growing with the community alongside. After about a few months and most times a year, you're definitely going to see that some of these active contributors, which have reduced to just a few numbers, are working towards taking on leadership roles. And these persons at this point can lead not only themselves, but also others within the communities. They're able to help other persons participate, able to get other persons engaged actively. They're able to develop new ways that other persons that are coming in can also get involved just as they did. Now, at this point, you can most of these persons get assigned leadership roles. Most of these persons get titles like maintainers, community leads, or moderators, and all of that. And it takes quite a longer time before these community leads eventually assume management roles. And oftentimes, we don't even get most of these contributors to assume these management roles because through their contributor experience, they either get burnt out or they get exhausted along the way, or something just happens that makes them lose interest with their contributions. There are very few times that you have people stay within a community to the point of assuming management roles and actually do take on these roles. There are very few times that we see that happening in most of our open source communities. And at this stage, you can classify them as decision makers because they have understood the community enough to take on decisions with other core members within the community. And well, it is an interesting way to see how most contributors come in with so much enthusiasm, and along the way, all of that dies off and you don't see them anymore. And it leads most times to want to ask the question, as a contributor and as a community lead, what is it that is going wrong, or what is it that I should take note of? Is it that the community is not safe enough? And as a contributor, why getting involved, we often find ourselves asking questions like, is this community safe enough for me as a contributor? As a community lead, you might also want to ask, is my community doing enough to make people feel safe? And as a contributor, you want to ask, is it welcoming enough for me? Because definitely you'd want to see or get involved in a place that allows you to spread your wings and discover new ways that you can get involved, right? And so you'd want to ask, is this community welcoming enough for me as a contributor? Does it support all forms of contributions? Now, this means not only code-focused contributions, but as well as non-code contributions. And these non-code contributions, are they recognized as contributions at all within these communities? These are questions that contributors often find themselves asking while participating. And then, how does this community offer support to minority groups and individuals that are underrepresented in one way or the other? So many contributors definitely want to know answers to questions like this before they even get involved within your community. And so it is up to you as a project lead to also ask yourself these questions and look for ways that you can answer or provide answers to your contributors that are asking these questions respectively. And when it comes to reviewing or tracking the different forms of contributions that come in within your community, you'll see that there's always this difficulty of finding out who is active or who is not active. Now, GitHub does a great job to give us like statistics on who is active within your community. But there is also there are also other platforms that, when properly monitored, you can actually get access to who who is doing what within your community and what they are doing and how active they have been and how dedicated they've even been over the period. Now, I'm talking about platforms like our Slack channels, where you can use the analytics from your Slack to determine how active someone has been within your community over time. You could use your platforms like Discourse to also review how many persons have been engaging and interacting with contributors on that particular platform, or even responding to questions and all. We can also use platforms like Stack Overflow to check who has been asking questions and who has been answering questions about your products, about your open source community on this platform. Reddit is another exciting place that you can also get or try to review who has been responding questions on behalf of your community for other members who are interested or curious about your project or your community. Now, using social media platforms like Twitter or LinkedIn, you can also look out for persons that actively recommend your open source project, actively recommend your open source communities to other persons that are willing to either adopt or looking for project suggestions to get on track with. Now, not only can you use the social media platforms, but using other tools like your Orbit, you can also discover the analytics in a more vivid situation, or in a more clear angle, in the sense that you know who has been tagging, who has been mentioning, who has been liking, who has been retweeting. These are all forms of contributions that often go unnoticed in the open source space. But however, every little tweet that someone makes does draw attention to a project by getting either one person or two persons interested or curious about your open source community. And I think that would be classified as a form of contribution in one way or another, right? You can go as far as checking your Discord, your GitLab if you have one, and then review also contributors that are making non-code contributions in forms of blog, in forms of developing guidelines, in forms of writing documentation, in form of managing the community engagement, and even organizing events that are going on within your community. All these are different ways where you can track your contributors, the contributions that are coming in on a day-to-day base within your open source community. And then what are those things that you need to watch out for? What are the kind of things to track when trying to understand your contributors? Well, you can actually track all forms of contributions. And by all forms of contribution, I mean not just contributions that are available or accessible on GitHub, but contributions that are on all of these platforms we have listed that are often left unnoticed. We're talking about the comments on specific projects, on tags. We're talking about the discourse. We're talking about your Twitter, even as far as your social media handles like LinkedIn, YouTube, if you have one, and all of this. We're talking about the non-code contributions, like the documentation, the community management that go on a day-to-day basis. How many persons are willing to come and welcome other contributors on board, either by saying, hello, welcome to the community, or hello, do you need help in this, or even answering questions that are thrown within the Slack community that no one actually bothers to review or even go over. You can also track other contributions like the translation. You can track your research, the researchers, the marketing and promotion contributions, the user feedback, the testing, the event management, and so many other non-code contributions that people make on a day-to-day basis within our open source projects. Now, while most of these contributions might not be able to be viewed or even looked at on GitHub, you can use your different community platforms to actually track and also monitor some of these engagements. And while on GitHub, if you also want to take note of some contributions. You can look out for the persons that are creating new issues or fixing bug issues. You can also look out for people that are reviewing code. You can look out for people that are dropping comments on specific questions dropped under issues. You can look out for people that are fixing security issues within your project, and also all those who are willing to carry on automated testing or even bot development within your project. All these are awesome forms of contributions that people do make within open source communities, most of which go unnoticed. But when properly monitored, you can actually look out for this and recognize as well as appreciate the persons that are making efforts in this particular area. And so, what are the requirements for better contributor experience? They are very simple. For every project, the requirements might vary in some way or another, because your project might be one that requires some form of a more technical overflow than another project. However, some basic requirements that I think every project does need on in order to help contributors better participate are the README. Your README guide is a very important and necessary document for every contributor experience, in the sense that from my experience, whenever I go to a GitHub page, the first thing I want to read through is the README, because I expect to see a summary of your project there, to see the features that the project offers, to see areas that I might also participate as a contributor, to see areas that the community also gets involved in, and that I might find of interest. And so highlighting most of the core things regarding your project in a README would also keep your contributors more intrigued about that project enough to move further to identify issues that they can contribute in. Then you might also want to move on to look at your contributing guidelines for code and as well as non-code contributions. Now, a quick story. The first year when I started contributing to open source, I came across this particular project that I really wanted to be a part of, mostly because I thought the project was exciting and I wanted to be part of the community, because I met some of the members already and they were really exciting persons. And so I wanted to contribute to this project, right? But as someone with very little skills and experience at that time, I tried to go over their contributing guidelines, and trust me, it was really, really bulky. It was so much that I couldn't even understand which was an important part and which was not an important part. I was just reading. There was a bunch of documents and I kept going over and over and over again. Now, it's one thing to have guidelines. It's one thing to go overboard and have guidelines that end up confusing your contributors. Now, I'm saying this because at the end of the day, I did not contribute to that community because I wasn't sure where to start. There were like resources upon resources upon resources, and all of it was considered as contributing guidelines. And it's not as if they were not informative enough. There was a lot of technical jargon that someone with very little skills might not even have an understanding of. And at the end of the day, I almost spent most of my time Googling what each sentence meant rather than understanding what each sentence was trying to, dish out. And that is what one challenge that most open source projects make. Filling your documentation or your contribution guidelines with so many technical jargons ends up scaring most contributors, especially those with very little or little technical skills. And so developing contributing guidelines for code related contributions based on the level of expertise. If your project is one that is focused specifically for engineers, you might also want to develop in a more simpler version of your contributing guidelines for non-technical experts that are just getting into the field, but also are interested in your contribution or interested in contributing to your open source project. Now, you might also want to write or develop another contributing guidelines for the non-code contributions, because most times I go over project and I just have to use my initiative to make my non-code contributions because the documentation does not highlight how non-code contributors are welcome, which is a way to also throw most persons off whenever they want to contribute. So developing contributing guidelines for also the non-code contributions will help your contributors better intrigued about your open source project. Next is outlining and looking for ways to enforce your code of conduct. I believe every open source project should have a well-detailed and enforceable open source code of conduct, because while we're trying to collaborate with multiple and diverse set of individuals, our cultures and beliefs vary. And so trying to look for ways that we can understand ourselves using the code of conduct helps a lot in so many ways. It helps avoid issues of misunderstanding, using vulgar languages or languages that offend people in one way or another. It helps to bring that respect amongst ourselves as contributors, because you know that the community shuns against this, and I wouldn't want to offend not the community alone, but the person in question, and so I wouldn't do that. So having a well-detailed code of conduct gives your contributors a head start to know that, okay, I feel safe that whatever my contributions is within the community, I'm not going to get any threats from my fellow contributors or even maintainers at some point, because the code of conduct backs me up at this point. And one other key requirement is having a detailed onboarding flow. And so when contributors get into a project, there's always this chaos within our heads as contributors, because I'm like, there's so many moving parts. Which part should I start from? Should I go to writing a bunch of code, or should I just focus on reading documentation, and how long do I have to read documentation? And after I'm done reading this documentation, where do I go next? Very good questions that so many persons have in mind. But with a very detailed onboarding flow or mentorship flow, you can easily save all of the struggles that contributors seem to experience by just giving them the onboarding flow, that they can have a clearer picture of what to expect, how long they're going to be at the learning phase, what happens after they make it past the learning phase, where they're going to go next if they make it past a particular section within the onboarding flow, and then where their final destination within your open source community is. And we also want to understand some non-conventional methods to recruit and retain contributors. Now, yes, you are definitely going to get a bunch of contributors, but what happens to the conventional methods, which is just dishing out a bunch of resources and saying, go read the documentation, it should be enough, or here is the link to our contributor guide, it should be good enough, or here is the link to our contributor.md file, everything you need is provided in there. That really doesn't do the work anymore, because I could read the documentation and still not come back to your community. I could definitely go over all of the documents that you have provided and not even come back the next day to continue with my contributions. And so how do we recruit people, get more persons involved after doing our outreach, and then make these persons willing to stay voluntarily? Well, there's so many ways we could tackle this that do not involve just dishing out a bunch of documentation, tons and tons of things to read, bunch of videos to read, different areas to dive in. We can start by first developing proper onboarding practices for our communities. Now, this can involve, for every open source project, your onboarding process might vary in the sense that your project might be the type that requires hands-on guides, or your project might be the type where everyone is busy, and so you have to look for other persons, outsource people who would be responsible for onboarding or getting people involved. Other projects focus on getting some of the core engineers to volunteer as part-time mentors for other persons within the community. All of these are different ways that you can actually tackle your onboarding process. But then you can go ahead to put in more effort by developing like a hands-on contributor flow. And so that whenever I come in as a contributor, not only do I get linked to bunch of articles and bunch of documentation, but I also maybe get a short video that gives me a head start. Hello, welcome to this community. You're first going to do this, and then after this, you get to this point, and after that, you get this to this point. Or you just give me a graphic representation that points out to different areas and different segments, just to give me a picture in my head that, okay, this is what I am looking towards as I contribute to this particular community. Now, a quick instance is there was a time when I briefly contributed to the Apache Foundation. And then during that period, my contributions were not as much as other persons. But someone I knew at the time got recognized and invited to the core contributors team under the Apache Foundation. I thought it was an amazing thing because at the time he knew, or this person in question knew that, okay, if I keep contributing over this particular period of time, I'm expected to attain this particular recognition over this period. And this comes with certain privileges, or it moves me from this level of contributing to the next level of contributing, right? So having a detailed contributor flow gives your contributors like a head start of what they're looking towards and what they're actually working towards within your community. And then developing useful and usable, quality and usable beginner guides that people can easily jump on. The documentation on its own is a really large, giving documentation on its own is a large task to actually give to someone who is just developing interest for your project. So you'd want to give them a catcher that is intriguing enough to have them more interested. And that is why the documentation or the guide which you're providing should be very beginner friendly, straight to the point, and like gives your contributors the key things that they need to get started with. Over time, you can give them links to other documents, but then for a start, just providing the beginner guides and beginner resources is enough. And then you can also improve on your onboarding by providing workshops and demos on a weekly or monthly basis, just to better explain what your technology or your project technology is built on, how it works, and how they can utilize it in real time. And this does help a lot because using an instance from community layer 5, which I have been contributing to, there was this period where so many persons brought in questions that they do not understand this and they're unable to get involved with this. So we try to adopt a system of onboarding where we have workshops every once in a while, calling on maintainers to explain a particular concept from the project. And we realized that having videos that are readily available from these workshops made it easy to point people to those videos that, okay, if this is an area that you're having issue in, you can just check out this workshop video. Or if this is an area that you're having issues in and there's no video on it, we go ahead to set up a workshop specific to that particular question or request. And then we try to educate more persons on that particular topic. And it did help so many persons in the sense that it was easy to simplify concepts without having to go over the entire project resources all over again. And so you can also improve on the contributor experience by adopting contributor trainings. And this can be done through a body system and using the same instance from the layer 5 community. When I started contributing within this community, it was really difficult for me to break in, but I really found I was interested in continuing with my contributions. And so I stuck around. And after a period, I realized that I didn't want other persons coming in to have the same challenge or experience the same difficulties that I did experience. And from my experience, I was able to better understand things because I had someone that I would reach out to like quickly and ask questions in terms of whatever challenges or concerns that I had. And so it was easy for me to suggest that we should consider a body system or like a mentorship kind of program where we have delegates from the community that are already knowledgeable about certain aspects stand in as go-to persons for any person or anyone who is concerned or wants to better understand a particular thing. Now we started this and then named it the Meshmates program, where we had different individuals that are experts in code, experts in community, documentation, different areas that they are experts in, available for anyone who wants to be mentored or wants to be given like a run through of a particular project. Recently, we also brought up this same program within the Chaos community, and it is called like the Chaos Tour Guide, which is another excellent way to get persons to want to reach out, because while it is easy for you to come to the community and drop questions within the general Slack channels, some persons have this fright that if they ask questions, they might not get responses, or if they ask questions, they might feel stupid at the end of the day because they fear that their questions are not knowledgeable enough. And so many persons fear so many things, and having a buddy system makes it easy to just go to that one person, ask questions quickly without feeling shamed or embarrassed at anything, and you can get quick responses for. And then you can also consider the peer-to-peer learning, where you pair up an expert in the a community with someone who is still getting started. Once you have someone who is getting in and is not sure of how to get involved, you can refer them to an expert in the community who might be an engineer or one of the team leads, just so that they can easily reach out to this person whenever they have concerns. It does help a lot because it's always easier to get onto one person or have that one individual that you can easily call out to whenever you have challenges. Another thing to consider to improve this contributor experience is encouraging contributor welfare programs. These welfare programs can come in the form of burnout initiatives. We know that so many times contributors, not only contributors, now we're talking about contributors on the maintainer level, contributors who have been in the community for almost 6 months to 1 year. There are times where we get overwhelmed by the workload because there are very little or few contributors that are assuming these roles. And so you definitely get to a point where you're overwhelmed and feel burdened by the entire thing, but you can't really come to air up these concerns because you'd feel like no one would hear you. So as a project lead, it's always great to consider some welfare programs like the burnout initiatives, where every once in a while you get together with your maintainers and hear their thoughts and their opinions. How has your experience been as a maintainer? What challenges are you encountering as a maintainer? Are there areas that we can lessen your burden as a maintainer? Because this is most of these contributors or most of these maintainers do not get compensated. And so it's easy for them to just drop out of your project without any prior notice, or even silent quit while contributing to your project without any reasonable points to why they're doing that, right? But using these burnout initiatives, you can easily get one-on-one discussions with your maintainers to understand their point of view, areas that they feel concerned on, or areas that they do not feel okay with as they're contributing, and look for ways that you can help tackle some of the challenges that they're encountering. You can also lead some psychological safety programs within these communities to help persons feel safe as they're participating, because yes, there are issues where, or there are cases where people come in with their contributions with aim of contributing, but oftentimes they often drop like insensitive comments, hostile messages towards the maintainers, and sometimes it comes in the form of microaggressions that we do not know. We do not feel like, okay, I can outwardly say you offended me or I feel offended by this, but mentally the persons in question do feel affected by the sentences or the situations at hand. So leading some psychological safety programs can also help your maintainers and core contributors to better discuss the challenges that they're encountering and help you see ways that you can better their experiences. And then you can also lead like a recognition and reward systems. Now, this is a very interesting topic that I always wanted to point out in most open source projects, because so many persons participate in open source projects for decades only to retire, and at the end of the day, they have very few times where they were recognized for their contributions. And sometimes it's disheartening to see that people make so much effort and then someone else comes into the picture and is given the reward that this other person is actually deserving of. And so while your maintainers are putting in the efforts, or why contributors are putting in the efforts, as a community lead or as a community owner, it is expected that you also consider ways that you can better improve, make them feel good about the efforts they're putting in by issuing out badges or incentives that actually keep them interested in what they're doing or happy with what they are doing. Now, it doesn't have to be some form of compensation, but it could be a minor form of recognition every once in a while that says, we appreciate you as a community for all that you've been doing. Keep up the good work. That is always a great way to keep persons happy that their efforts are also appreciated. And finally, you can also consider mentorship programs. Now, setting up or being involved in some mentorship programs within the open source space get other persons also interested to participate, because they know that, okay, if I'm active in this community over this period of time, there's definitely going to be a time where I can participate or register for this internship program that the community is a part of, and I might stand a chance to get in because of my activities that I've been participating in. And so being part of this also gets a lot of persons intrigued about your open source project and want to keep participating with their contributions over time. And some of the best practices you can keep in mind to help improve your contributor experience include providing detailed and clear guidelines and instructions for contributors. Now, you can use your contributing guidelines to do this, but like I said, having a detailed code of conduct helps and makes a lot of things easier for people to break in. Providing a warm and inclusive environment for people to participate in, because no one would want to get involved in an open source community where they feel like they are not needed or they are not welcome. And so providing a safe place for people to actually contribute regardless of our differences helps a lot and makes more persons interested and willing to keep on with their contributions. Be responsive and helpful. So many open source projects, I know maintainers are active on other things, but sometimes you ask a question in an open source community and get responses 2 weeks or a month after, and at that point you're asking yourself, should I go ahead with this issue, or should I just let it slide since it's been like a month since I made a comment? I know I've been in situations like that, and so many other persons have come forward to say that they have been in situations like this. So as a community lead or as a project owner, you should also consider being responsive or developing systems where it's easy for maintainers to be responsive at every point in time to questions that come up from the contributor end. Also, encourage communication and collaboration within communities through workshops, through meetup sections, and other ways that bring members of your community together to ask questions, to participate, and also engage with one another. And then you can also try to recognize and reward contributors as they make efforts in their contributions. Like I said, looking for ways to actually appreciate these persons, either by issuing out badges, giving out incentives every once in a while, or even looking for ways to recognize some contributions with mentorship opportunities. Is an excellent way to keep persons happy and satisfied with their contributions and willing to want to come back again. And finally, provide opportunities for growth and advancement. Now, this means that as I'm contributing in your community, I want to know that, okay, after a period of 3 months, there are chances that I've understood your project completely and I can move on to the next level. After a period of 6 to 8 months, I can start doing things on my own without any form of help from your maintainers, because I completely understand things. And at this point, I can even help other persons. Over a period of 1 month, 1 year to 2 years, I'm already taking on some leadership roles like the maintainer, community manager, project lead or something. just because I have been active or I am active and consistent with my contributions. So I want to have that picture in mind as I'm contributing, to know whether I'm actually making efforts within this community, or I'm making progress, or I am not. And in situations where I'm not, I'll definitely want to walk out of that community to look for a place where I feel like I am making great progress. So you might want to consider providing opportunities for contributors, if it means providing ways to upskill, if it means providing ways to also like improve on their knowledge, and basically take them to a better level that they are currently in when they got into the community. It does help a lot. And finally, I like to say that the contributor experience varies from different communities, but it's always good to understand that it doesn't end at just welcoming so many persons within our communities and having them read through a bunch of documentations and then pointing them to our GitHub repositories to go and identify issues. It doesn't end at that. It goes as far as looking for ways to retain these persons after this period of time, inviting them or recruiting them to our communities, and even having them take on some managerial roles over a long period of time as they contribute to your community, because there are certain contributors that come to a project with the aim of actually assuming leadership roles and roles within management, and that is all that I have to say in my section. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope this has been insightful enough to help you improve or look for ways to improve on the contributor experience within your respective open source project. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'll be open to take them now.